Hey there, this is your pal Pally, and welcome back to Git Er Raid. Warlords of Draenor beta testing continues on with some more heroic mode bosses. Here's a guy who wants some ore. Just feed him some ore and collect your loot. Actually, it's a bit more complicated than that as you fight the ever-hungry Oregorger. Unfortunately, due to some DCing by myself and my testing group falling apart after only a few polls, I don't have extensive footage of this encounter, but watched quite a few streams and saw all of the mechanics I missed. Oregorger is listed in the Dungeon Journal as the second boss in Blackrock Foundry and has quite a unique looking room. In fact, that room is a major piece of the fight in the transition phase. You'll note it looks like a little mini maze. Well, the boss will become a bowling ball later in the fight and will roll around these paths. So get ready for that later when we talk about it. For now, use whatever portion of the room gives you line of sight to everyone and allows for some room to move. Before talking about the abilities, what you need to understand first about this boss is that he has an energy bar that he'll use on his abilities. You can't control him using most of his abilities, but you can on one of them. How good you handle that ability will dictate how long you spend in Phase 1 before he transitions to his roly fun. So knowing that, what you need to watch out for is Blackrock Barrage. This ability will do some light AoE damage to the raid and is interruptible. He will attempt to chain cast this at least 3 times, and you really should set up a rotation for interrupts. If you can handle it, you'll have more time in Phase 1, and of course avoid the damage entirely. Again, realize just how fast he casts this, and he'll do it back to back. Interrupters should just be all paying attention to this with twitchy fingers. Moving on to his other abilities, Wretched Blackrock is a fairly simple one. He'll launch a pool of acid at someone at range that will do some major damage if you stand in it. The pool won't go away for quite a while, so this is how you lose portions of the room until Phase 2 begins. Just move out of the nasty pool and try to place these decently well so you don't trap yourself somewhere. Next up, Explosive Shard is the bane of melee. He'll cast this shard on one of the melee, and it's really hard to see, but once it gets on someone, it will explode from some additional fire damage to nearby people. Just really try to pay attention and be moving around the boss's feet if you can. Hopefully this becomes more obvious with either a fix from Blizzard or when boss mods can call it out. Lastly, the really interesting mechanic for this phase is called Acid Torrent. From the description, it's a cone of acid that hits its nearest target for 500k physical damage and will hit others with around 232k damage, but it can be reduced by that nearest target mitigating the damage. I know, it sounds confusing, but basically it's supposed to hit your tank for that physical damage, who will use both their fancy armor and other damage mitigations to reduce the damage that goes out to the rest of the raid. It is even mitigated by any shields that are on the tank. So just to make this clear, let me put up an example of how this works. It may not be exact, but should prove to illustrate the point. The tank gets hit with Acid Torrent for 500k. Their armor reduces it by, say, 50%. So we're at 250k. Now they have some minor cooldown running, like, say, Bark Skin. Reduce that another 20% to bring it to 200k. Then the tank had some Priest or Pally shields on them for 100k, and only actually took 100k damage. Certainly a big hit, but we cut that 500k hit down to 100k. Now we look at that 230k that is supposed to go out to the raid. With what the tank did to that initial damage, that means 232k turns into about 46k. That just barely tickles the raid. Again, this may not be exactly how things are calculated, but you get the idea that if your tank can reduce the damage taken, it helps out how much damage goes out to the raid. So that's it for Phase 1. There will be lots of acid pools around and the shards to dodge, but then once the boss's energy runs out, he wants to recharge. And he recharges by eating Blackrock ore all around the room. So once this phase starts, a bunch of crates will become targetable around the room. During testing, the target frames for these were in the ceiling, and it was really hard to find which crates you could target and blow up with your DPS. But I'm sure that'll be easier once this goes live. So why are the crates important? they contain the Blackrock ore for the boss to feed on. So of course, the boss starts rolling all around the room to eat the ore, and if you are caught in his path, you take a big chunk of damage and are stunned for 4 seconds. He'll also crash into these walls, doing a bit of nature damage to the whole raid. And if he hits the same spot twice, it hurts even more. So your goal is to attract the boss to run over the ore from the crates that you DPS down, and get him out of this phase quickly. Not just for the sake of getting bowled over 1,000 times, but he also gets a stacking damage buff to his smacking into walls, so eventually those collisions will start killing off your raid. Once the boss has recharged his energy to full by eating ore, he'll head back into Phase 1 mechanics and go from there. There's another phase that I could not get a lot of info on, where he would seemingly just stand there and do a bunch of collisions or quake over and over. This may be when you run out of ore after 2 cycles, if that's possible. I saw guilds kill this without that phase and with it. The damage in that phase was apparently not very deadly, so it didn't seem to be a soft and rage type thing to worry about, but I thought I'd note it for completion purposes. So there isn't much to talk about with respect to strategy. Oregorger's abilities sort of dictate most of what you need to do. In Phase 1, you should find an appropriate place for your raid to position. Pulling the boss where he is, and keeping him pointed towards the ranged group over here, seem to help with being able to effectively manage the acid torrent. Melee just needs to be at the sides and watch for shards. Ranged will quickly lose their space as more and more acid pools come out. So just keep trying to put your ranged group stacked up, and move as a group out of the pools. I went over the detail on Acid Torrent, so we kind of already covered that. Just see what you can do about reducing the damage on the primary target, which should mostly be a tank. For Phase 2, this is about sending groups of people out to kill ore crates quickly to fill them up and get him out of this phase. Getting hit by his roll isn't too terrible, but try to avoid it as he rolls around. If this phase goes too long, raid cooldowns would probably be a good idea too. Just send maybe 2 or 3 DPS and a healer out to break crates. I don't have an exact method on how you should accomplish this, but once it goes live or is tested on normal mode, I'll fill in the gaps here maybe with some annotations or a link to the normal mode guide. That's about all for this guide on Oregorger. Get through a few cycles of his phases and burn him down. Tanks, you may only need one of you, but try to keep the boss pointed towards ranged and intercept the acid torrent with as much damage reduction as you can manage. Healers, keep a light foot as pools of acid spawn, and do what you can to shield the tank from acid torrent. Raid CDs might be best used if Phase 2 goes on too long. DPS, just watch your feet for either shards or acid pools, and then break open ore crates as quickly as you can in Phase 2 while avoiding his rolls of death. As always, please comment, like, and or subscribe to the video if you found it helpful, and have a good one!